All right. So Dee Clarkin from Indivisible Montgomery, and welcome tonight. We're so glad that you're here with us and hopefully staying warm. And we have our special guest tonight is Melissa Walker of the States Project. And Melissa Walker is actually not just the head of the Giving Circles at the States Project. She's also an author of young adult novels and young adult and children literature. She's been the author of 10 young adult novels. She's a former magazine editor. But she also enjoys gathering people together to share stories about how they can pool their resources and change the balance of power in state legislatures. She is a graduate of Vassar College, who hails from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times and Teen Vogue. So I think I'm just going to turn it over to you, Melissa, okay, to get started with this. And then we'll have your talk, and then I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. Is that okay?
That sounds great. Thanks for having
Okay.
me.
Yeah, thanks. And everybody, if you could hold your questions, or if you'd like to tee them up in the chat, you could go ahead and do that. Everybody sees the chat, right? Down at the bottom of your screen. It's up. You're welcome to put questions in there. All right, Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dee. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm really happy to talk to y'all tonight. I usually tell a story of how I got involved with the States Project, and I'm happy to share that in the Q&A portion. But tonight, I really want to talk about state legislatures and this moment specifically because it is not an easy week. I have turned off the news alerts on my phone. I hope some of you who need to do that are doing that also, but it is, it's a tough time and there's no denying that. So I work at the States Project. We focus on shifting power in state legislatures to elect majorities that are focused on improving lives. And we do that because we believe that state legislatures are the strongest force for change in this country, and that they are the bodies that have done more harm or more good on the issues that we care about domestically more than any other level of government. So, from education funding to environmental policy to healthcare to civil rights to abortion to the core of our democracy, voting rights, gerrymandering, the drawing of the district lines that decide who goes to Congress, state legislatures have done more harm or good on those issues in the past few decades than any other part of our government. And the States Project focuses there for many reasons because we believe that. But in a practical sense, we also know that it is often cheaper to change the balance of power in an entire state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat. And the power of giving circles who come together and focus resources on state legislatures is absolutely immense in terms of leveraging pooled dollars. Now, given the results at the top of the ticket in 2024, we should have lost resoundingly everywhere at the state legislative level. We can't control a national wave, and when a national wave brings out a voter base that is ready to elect Trump, that is something that is incredibly hard to counter down ballot. But we didn't lose resoundingly everywhere, because in North Carolina, we helped break the right-wing supermajority in the state house to protect Governor-elect Josh Stein's veto power. And with that governing power, he can block further right-wing attacks on personal freedoms, including abortion access in a very key southern state. And at the top of the ticket in Wisconsin, the state went for Donald Trump, but in the state Senate, the States Project achieved our goal, winning enough seats to put us on track for a majority in that chamber in 2026. That was 4 flips in the state Senate, as well as 10 flips in the state assembly, which is what they call their state house. So Wisconsin was another bright spot in November. Now, we did not achieve our goals in states like Arizona, Kansas, Michigan, Nevada. But I do want to take a moment for Pennsylvania, which is the state that the Indivisible Montgomery Giving Circle focused on, because in a year where every statewide election in Pennsylvania, from the presidential level to the auditor general, went for the right wing, holding a one-seat majority in the state house that we won by 63 votes in 2022 should have been impossible. But we did it. We held every state house seat, including some in districts that went overwhelmingly for Trump. And this year, governing power in Pennsylvania in the House came down to fewer than 500 votes. So when we say that power is won on the margins in state legislatures, that is what we mean. And in Pennsylvania, we have been the largest coordinated donor fueling the effort to build governing power in Harrisburg since 2020. And this year, we invested more than 3 times the next largest donors. The dollars that this giving circle, that the Indivisible Montgomery Giving Circle raised, fueled our signature data-backed innovations in state legislative campaigns. That means incentivizing candidates to knock on more than 75,000 doors through a door knocking challenge, generating more than 100 local press stories for every candidate participating in our local press project, and ad testing television ads that were shown to actually move voters. We tested them before the buys were made. And when Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016 by similar margins, the right wing had a 39-seat majority in the Pennsylvania House. Today, we have a majority in the Pennsylvania House. And we have a majority that will fight a MAGA agenda in Harrisburg. And that is thanks to the sustained work of this community and others. So that is some good news. And it gives me some hope. Because if you had told me that Trump won every single swing state, I would have said that we lost big. But we didn't. Now, people sometimes ask, what does it mean for states to have majorities? What does it mean in the face of such a federal threat? So I'm going to share a little bit about state power, some things that honestly surprised me a little bit, even though I've been swimming in the state legislative pool for a long time, and I really believe in this power center. So some hopeful news in a week where there were a flurry of executive orders. State governments have the power to fight back here if they have majorities that are willing to do so. So if we want to talk about jobs, there has been no federal minimum wage increase since 2009, 15 years ago. But there are 30 state legislatures that have since enacted minimum wage increases. Those states have generated $1.5 trillion in additional income annually for workers. State legislatures have huge power over that issue. And sticking with jobs, there's currently no federal paid family leave policy. But in the 13 states that have enacted paid family leave policies, 66 million employees accrue 700 million weeks of guaranteed leave annually. State legislatures have a lot of power over that issue too. If we want to talk about healthcare, 40 state legislatures have enacted Medicaid expansion, which is part of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. That covers 72% of the total population, or 240 million people. In the US, state legislatures have the most control over ensuring that families can afford quality healthcare or not, depending on Medicaid expansion. That is an example of something that comes from the federal level, but federal laws are enacted by state governments. And there are still 10 states that have decided not to expand Medicaid for their people because they want to stand against that. State legislatures have a lot of power. Still on healthcare, specifically abortion. After the 2022 midterms, 60% of Americans lived in states that did not have a state constitutional right to abortion. And those are states where the legislature has the final say over abortion after Roe fell. State legislatures control that issue. In terms of public education, this one really surprised me. I know that Trump has put out videos saying that he's going to defund the Department of Education and has talked about that extensively. That is very scary, but 47% of funding for elementary and secondary education comes from the state, and another 45% comes from local sources that are ultimately controlled by the legislative process. So that's still the state, which means that state governments control 92% of education funding in this country, and the federal government controls 8%. So not good for them to dismantle things at the federal level, but not existential if states step up and use that 92%. Talking about infrastructure, which is a boring word that holds truly amazing details within it. State governments control 75% of highway and road funding. They regulate 80% of water dams in the United States. That may not be an issue you think about, dams, but that's the point. Even with things we aren't actively thinking about, but yet have a huge impact on our lives, state legislatures have huge control. And we haven't even gotten to climate, or how 75% of the Paris Climate Agreement can be achieved by state legislatures willing to do that work. So we know that Trump has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreements. But again, without any federal action, state governments could achieve 75% of what's required there. And after the Supreme Court gutted the Clean Water Act, 100% of waterways and wetlands that had federal protection are now protected or not by state legislatures. I'm going to wind this down because I could keep going for a while, but I do want to say that finally, elections, democracy. We know that states draw congressional maps, and in over 70% of the country, that's the legislature defining the playing field on which we fight for Congress. And federal elections, 100% of state legislatures administer, and I quote the Constitution, the times, places, and manner of holding elections, and can appoint presidential electors. Elections are controlled by states, even federal ones. So there's a lot that states can do in this moment if they have majorities that are focused on improving lives. And to sprinkle a little more hope on the week, compared to Trump's first term, where Democrats had 7 state-level trifectas, meaning majorities in the state house, the state senate, and holding the governor's mansion, today Democrats hold 15 trifectas, more than twice as many as we had in 2016. And they also hold either one chamber or the gubernatorial seat in 12 additional states. That is governing power that represents 59% of the American population, 63% of the US GDP, and 70% of all state level spending. That is good news and progress at this level. So for me, I have taken some solace in the steadiness of my work with the States Project. If Harris had won, I would focus on state legislatures to bolster an agenda that would improve people's lives from the federal level. And since Trump won, I will focus on state legislatures to fight against what's going to happen in Project 2025 and all of the executive orders and things coming through. Our country was built this way. Our founders feared that a king would come. Get emotional. And states were given the power to protect against a king. And now they have their chance. There are 50 mini Congresses in this country, and they have immense power. So I do take some comfort knowing that I'm focused on the right spot, working on the foundations of democracy, and in the place where I can make the biggest difference with my friends and my family and my networks. So that is my hopeful, I hope, message for you all tonight, that there are places to fight. And for me, this is the most impactful place I have found. I'd love to take questions and chat more with y'all.
I see some clapping hands down here and a heart. So thank you, Melissa. I'd like to start out with a question that I hope isn't too kind of in the weeds, but it's very timely. So I think we saw the power of the states almost immediately when we saw was it this morning? Oh my God, it's like a blur, shock and awe. Anyway, it was either yesterday or this morning we saw that 22 states had filed lawsuits against the one of the
The
one of
birthright.
yeah the birthright citizenship that's in the I think it's the 14th Amendment, right? And so can you talk a little bit about the role of the AGs at the state level?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm turning off my space heater because it's getting real hot in here. Yeah, the attorneys general are obviously very important in this. And this is something that I think about a lot because when you work on state legislatures, you are working on a body of many people and trying to build a majority. And there's not the story of kind of one hero coming in to do something. But one of the things that our team talked about a lot right after Trump won was the fact that state legislatures have the power to expand attorneys general power in their state. And we knew that that was going to be an important thing to do because there are paths to these kinds of lawsuits and suing the federal government when things overstep. So attorneys general can be very powerful, and their power can be determined by state legislatures. So it is not uncommon if an attorney general is of a certain party and a state legislature is dominated by the other party for there to be some limits passed. So I'm hoping that we don't see a lot of that. But yes, that those types of suits, I think we'll see a lot of them in states that have attorneys general who are willing to go to battle here. And clearly a lot of states do have that. One of the reasons why the States Project has remained exclusively focused on state legislative races is because there are a lot of entities that organize to win statewide races. So it is, when you organize to win statewide, like state parties often do, you're organizing to win a presidential election for a certain candidate, or a governor's election, or attorney general, or secretary of state. And there's a lot of organizations that rush in and say, like, I can win Pennsylvania, or we can help win Michigan, or we can help win Arizona. Our job at the States Project is to focus on specific state legislative districts that will shift power in the state capital. We're very focused on that because it has, for a long time, been left behind on our side, while it has been very well organized on the right. And so coming in to fill a gap that we saw has been really important to us, and we have stayed laser focused on that specific body. But yes, attorneys general, also hugely important.
Thank you. Okay. I'm looking for, okay, Barbara Lovitz has her hand raised.
Hi, Melissa. I have two process questions about the Giving Circle process itself. I'm curious. I know that the Giving Circle, the people that get funded, you have challenges for them, door knocking challenges, and the candidate who knocks on the most doors in a given period of time gets additional money. Whose doors are they knocking on? Are they knocking on everybody's doors? Are they not just knocking on Democrats' doors? Are they trying to persuade Republicans? Whose doors are they knocking on?
Great question. So to give everyone the context on this, it is a little different in each state, but I'll talk about Pennsylvania since that was the focus state here. So the candidates who are in those potential tipping point seats, the closest districts, we've challenged them to a door knocking contest, basically, where they turn in their door knocking numbers every week. And at the end of every month, the top 4 door knockers get additional campaign contributions from the States Project. And we also have an element called clinch cards, where they mail follow-up postcards to voters that they've talked to. And whoever sends the most clinch cards also gets an additional campaign contribution. So this is to incentivize a big best practice in state legislative races, which is getting out on doors and talking to constituents rather than dialing donors for dollars from the office. And it's a really important part of our program. In state legislative districts, They will often start with the Democratic doors, making sure, shoring up, blah, blah, blah. But because of the door knocking challenge, they are able to hit a lot of doors in their district. And they do go beyond the normal turf that they cut. Campaigns will often kind of, just go to the Democratic doors or just go to a specific set of doors. The door knocking challenge, our goal is for them to get to a large portion of the doors in their district. I'm not going to say all because I think that's probably impossible. But if they knocked 6 days a week for like a few hours a day starting in the spring, they could probably do it. Our founder, Daniel Squadron, often talks about how he always says a ridiculous number, but to win a primary in New York. And he knocked 6 days a week for multiple hours a day starting in the spring before his election. And I think that is, the goal is for them to get to as many doors as possible and not necessarily, cut that turf a different way so that they're missing doors. One of the things, and the reason why we do this is because the candidate themselves knocking on a door is the thing that cuts through negative mailers or the national mood or anything that's going on that's going to make people feel disconnected, because having a candidate who is essentially a neighbor in a state legislative district knock on your door and talk about the grass on the softball field, the local school, the cracks in the sidewalk, the traffic pattern that drives everyone wild, that is the thing that cuts through the noise. And so we want them to do that as much as possible. We want them to spend their time doing that. And that's what the door knocking challenge really is all about.
There were two reasons why I asked that. One, when I was knocking on doors in Maryland for state level candidates, when we were doing persuasion, we were knocking on low propensity Democrats, independents, and low propensity Republicans. So we were going beyond just the Democrat circle to try and bring out people over to our side. And the other reason I asked that, I hope that if you're not doing what we were doing with the independents and Republicans, you might consider it, because low propensity voters are less familiar at all levels. And the other reason I asked was I really put a big stake in voter registration this past round. And I think when, as a suggestion, when the Giving Circle candidates are out knocking on doors, it's an opportunity for them to actually try and get unregistered voters to register. And that would be, we can't just continue working with the existing pool of voters. We have to expand it. And if they're out there knocking on doors, they could have information with them about registering to vote, or even helping people they're talking to register online while they're talking to them. And, it's really critical to expand that voter pool. So that was my question and my comment suggestion.
Totally agree. And it could be in the clinch card. Hey, remember we met on the doors in the summer? We talked about registering to vote. I'm hoping you had a chance to do that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Before we go on to another question, I realize, some of the folks on this call are kind of new and may not even be sure what a giving circle is. So can we just sort of roll back up a little bit before we go to more questions? So you talked, Melissa, to us about the power of the states and the power of state legislatures for good, improving people's lives. Why don't you talk a little bit about the States Project and what is the Giving Circle model? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So this leads to my origin story, which I'll try to summarize. But essentially, I was writing children's books and editing teen magazines in the fall of 2016. And after Trump was elected, I went to a publishing holiday party, and, the bell of pain was still ringing in my body. But I heard a New York State senator speak at this party, and that was Daniel Squadron. And the things he said turned my world around. I started to understand that state legislatures were in control of everything that I cared about, and also that they were way cheaper to influence. And I got together with some friends at that party, some other children's book authors, and we formed what we started to call a giving circle. we started learning about state legislatures and talking to our friends about it. 5 people over for pizza and beer, 10 people over for sushi and wine, and we really learned a lot. And we collected pledges from people, and we said we think we could fundraise and maybe flip a state legislature. This guy said, this state senator with wild eyes. And about a month after we started doing that, we had collected a good amount of pledges, and we called Daniel Squadron back and said, hey, we heard you speak at that party. We did it. We think we have like a good amount of money. You got to tell us what state to go into and what we should do. And he said, what? I've been giving that speech for 10 years. No one's ever done anything. And we said, well, we're ready to go. We're like fired up. We think this is the right place to focus. And some other things happened too, but about 6 months later, he resigned from the New York State Senate to start the States Project, to focus exclusively on shifting the balance of power in state legislatures. And we were the very first giving circle, and we raised $100,000 to go into Virginia that year with the States Project. It was 2017. We got in kind of late, but they did an analysis to analyze what were the tipping point seats. We funded the final campaign gaps for 10 candidates with that $100,000, and 9 of them won their seats. And the balance of power got so close in Richmond, just 1 seat away from flipping, that the next year Virginia expanded Medicaid and 400,000 people got healthcare who hadn't had it before. We felt connected to that policy outcome and wanted to see more change. So I went back to Daniel Squadron and I said, I want to meet all the other people who heard you speak and formed these giving circles. And he said, no one else did it. And I said, oh no, this is the most powerful thing we've ever done. This is the most impactful I've ever felt. And that's when I stopped writing children's books and started forming a Giving Circles program at the States Project, essentially to help other people do just what I had just experienced, which was getting friends and family and neighbors together and talking about where we could have an impact. And the program has now grown. My Giving Circle is starting year 9, which I can't believe. But we have over 200 Giving Circles across the country working with us now. And each of them chooses a target state from our list of states each year to focus on, and helps bring the electoral dollars that we need into that state to defend or achieve power. And so that's how this works. It really is the math of people coming together and understanding that sentence that I said earlier, which is, it is often cheaper to change the balance of power in an entire state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat, which can get up into the tens of millions of dollars. So Giving Circles really are people learning about why states matter, what state power can do, and how to have an impact. We always say, not where the glamour is, just where the power is. So Giving Circles come together. They get a page on our on a platform called Grapevine that we use, and can direct people to that page, share the stories that we share throughout the year of what's happening in their chosen state, share an impact report at the end of the year, and come to all of our Zooms and events, and then hold their own so that people can join in the work, learn about state legislatures, and really tend to democracy at a foundational level.
Okay, thank you so much for that background. I'm hoping that makes the whole thing kind of make sense here for some of our newer folks. I'm looking at the questions, some questions in the chat, and one of them, this is from Lindsay, and she's saying, what specific actions can we take to best support Governor Moore, that's our governor in Maryland, and our state house legislators to push back against the MAGA agenda? And I know that you focus on getting these people elected into office. So, but what do you think about that question?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it gives me the prompt to talk about another part of our work, which is, so I work on the electoral side with the political team, and that's where the Giving Circles work. We also have a policy team that actually works very closely with some Maryland folks and a bunch of other states, but Maryland included. And the policy team has a lawmaker engagement section, and their work is to help caucuses, state caucuses, so meaning the Maryland House Dems, the Maryland Senate Dems, align on an agenda and move forward on the laws that are good for their state. So we do have some model bills. We have a whole policy team, and the New York Times wrote a great article, which I'll put in the chat, about our policy work, which can kind of explain it more. But for a very long time, the right wing has had support of think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is essentially an organization that launders corporate bills and hands them to right-wing state legislators to pass in the state houses. And the left has had a bunch of disparate groups that each have like a single issue, policy issue agenda. And our goal really is to help caucuses align on passing good things that will improve people's lives. And if you look on our policy page, there's like 7 broad goals, things like investing in children, empowering people over special interests, clean air and water, things that any human would nod their head at. Under those goals, or under those values, are goals, things like ending hunger for 100% of households in the state, ending mass incarceration in the state. And under those targets are model bills that move states closer to achieving those goals. So that's the type of work that our policy team does to support state lawmakers who are sitting, because, and I was surprised to learn this, in 40 out of the 50 states, it's a part-time job that pays almost nothing, and people don't have staff, and not everyone's a policy expert, and those supports are really needed. But I'm going to share under that question in the chat a document that is not necessarily a state's project document, but is a document that talks about what folks can do to engage their own legislatures on issues they care about. And the truth is that state legislators are, I have found, very willing to meet with people, very willing to talk about things, very willing to, engage. They're just not as famous as their federal counterparts. And many people really welcome hearing from constituents and getting some help from coalitions who are willing to work on issues. So if you have some time to spare and some things that you care about, there are lots of ways to plug in.
Thanks. That'd be great. I'm looking through.
How about Stephanie and Gary? How do we get involved?
Well, I was going to
in
leave
the
that to
state's
the end, if
project?
that's let's leave that to the end, okay?
Okay, I just wanted
All
to
right.
make sure we
Yeah,
didn't
no,
miss it.
no, I'm looking through all of them. I know
Okay.
I got Stephanie and Gary, I got your back.
I'll seed the ground today.
What can, okay, well, Susan is asked, this is sort of the same flavor, perhaps. What can the Maryland legislature and governor do on immigration? Okay, so that's a very specific, question. Melissa, what do you think?
So I will be honest and say that I am not a policy expert, and that probably someone from our policy team would be much better to answer that question. In fact, I'm going to recommend that you at some point have a speaker from our policy team, maybe someone who's been working with Maryland, because I think that they could have very specific answers to those questions and share a lot more information. Because I haven't done the policy work, I am not sure. So I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. What happens when a federal law conflicts with a state law?
So
I know the devil is in the detail on a question like that. So I mean, I worked with lawyers for like half my career, so I know that's kind of a gross generalization. But what do you think?
Yeah. So when a federal law conflicts with a state law, the federal law takes precedence. But
yeah, there's some caveats there.
There are some caveats, and there are lots of ways for states to interpret federal law. So one example is, if we think about the issue of abortion, a lot of people feel like abortion was really banned when Dobbs fell, right? So suddenly all these states that had bans ready to go could actually do it. But the truth is that there were a lot of states that operated within a hair's breadth of federal law, and they had one clinic open. You know, states can really do what they want to around, you know, the legalities. And another example is the COVID relief funds that went out under the Biden administration. Alabama used a lot of those for private prisons. It was determined by the state government what, you know, what they did and how.
There you go.
And so there's a lot that states can do for good or ill around federal law.
Got it. Thank you so much. So Becky is asking, and going back to the door knocking challenge, which is a big deal. And this is also kind of interesting to me because, you know, right now, in the wake of the 24 election, there's been a lot of angst and discussion in the Dems. And of course, we're all waiting, you know, for our new DNC chair to maybe come in and solve all the problems in the world that we have. But that people are questioning the validity of traditional direct voter contact, such as door knocking, because we all felt like, well, we were all door knocking and look what happened. Is the States Project going to think about that at all and like maybe revisit some or move more of the efforts into messaging as opposed to direct voter contact? What do you think?
So a couple of things. One is that working at this level, this is where working at this level really gives me hope. Because when we are talking about door knocking, we aren't really talking about field teams or volunteers, where the quality of a knock can vary extremely, right?
That's fair.
We are really incentivizing the candidate themselves to knock on doors. And the reason why that's so important, especially in the districts where we work, which are so close on the margins in terms of voters and party dispersion, that's not a word, you know what I'm saying.
Distribution.
Yes, distribution. The candidate is the persuasion knock, and we need persuasion knocks in the districts where we work. Again, to talk about the local issues, to keep it to, yes, I also believe in boosting our public schools. You know, I want to see free breakfast and lunch for the school children in our public schools, like keeping it to those local kitchen table issues that most Americans agree on. And they really do. We have in our policy library, everything has been polled and tested and has proven popular and economical across parties. There are a lot of common sense things that everybody wants. And candidates who can stay local and stay to talking about what's right in front of them really can move the needle. I'll give you an example too of some layering of our tactics. This is an example from Pennsylvania 2022. We don't actually have the final district by district analysis for 2024 yet. But in 2022, we did start the door knocking challenge in Pennsylvania early. We had a candidate named Missy Serrato who ended up winning the door knocking challenge twice, which is very hard to do. She must have gone through a couple pairs of shoes. And when it came time to cut her ads in the fall, the ad consultant said, okay, these are the 3 issues that are relevant in your district. We want to cut these. We want to cut ads on these things to ad test. And she said, okay, but I've been on the doors for months. And what I'm hearing on the doors is that people are really excited that I'm a mom. People are really excited that there's a mom running. And I've heard a lot of times like moms got things done and they just really are resonating with this. So I'd like to cut an ad about being a mom. And of course the consultants were like, I don't know. And she was like, whatever, let's just cut a 4th ad and put it into the ad test because we're doing ad testing anyway.
Right.
And that is the ad that tested best. That is the ad that ran the most in her district. And she is the candidate who won by 63 votes and was the tipping point seat in the Pennsylvania House.
Wow.
So this is the type of tactic. These are the types of margins that you can see the impact. And what I said to every Giving Circle who chose Pennsylvania with us in 2022 was, that was you. Because if every piece of the basket weave hadn't been there in Pennsylvania in 2022, I don't know if we would have won power in the House by 63 votes.
Mm.
I am still astonished that we kept it in 2024 while Trump ran all over the state. But those tactics layered together can really outperform even a top of the ticket. And working locally has given me so much hope, because the truth is, candidate door knocking challenge, it's not scalable. Wouldn't work in a
Yeah.
federal race. You can't scale a
Yeah.
candidate going to that many doors. So I don't know what they need to do,
Yeah.
but I do know that what we have focused on, we have seen really work. And we do an analysis every year. So in mid-February, we're actually getting all the numbers back on district by district to see, did we overperform the Harris campaign? Did we underperform? Where and what happened and what tactics were deployed in that district? And was that candidate really knocking on doors? We have everyone's door knocking numbers. So it's it'll be a fascinating thing, but our analysis in 2022 was that this layered set of tactics really helped candidates jump above the line.
Okay. So the real value in your work and your approach is the candidate door knocking. When we talk about like people like here at Indivisible Montgomery door knocking, that's a whole different, it's apples and oranges.
Yes, it's
Okay.
different, and it's
Yeah.
also wonderful. It's just
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
tactic that we're funding and incentivizing.
So to Becky, I think the
you need a
jury
ride?
is out.
What? Do you need a ride? Oh, yeah, thank you. All right, let me text my parents.
Yeah, I'll just be
Oh.
in the front.
So the jury is out, Becky, on our kind of door knocking. All right, so let me go back up to the top of the questions. Dale wants to know, this is a very specific question that Melissa, I don't know if you'd like to take a crack at. Can Tom Homan really prosecute Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson? So Brandon, I'm assuming maybe there's a sanctuary city situation involved, or I don't know. Thoughts on that one?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I will tell you.
I
I
don't
wish
either.
I did, but I do not know.
Yep. Hope not. Let's see what else we got. Any other, Alexandra says, thanks for a great presentation. This is a little similar to the earlier question, since we're lucky enough to have a trifecta. What strategies would be most effective for us to pursue in our activism in the Trump era? So I don't know. They go back to the policy library, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
yeah.
one of the things that I think, one of the things that I've actually encouraged some other Indivisible groups to do is like, look at the library. I mean, there are model bills in there. So
Yeah.
if there are things that Maryland maybe hasn't
That's
done
fair.
yet that you're interested in, there's a lot of resources to
Totally.
bring and say, this is
Why
something.
aren't we doing this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I'm
But
looking and then
I think that our involvement with the States Project is specifically to support people someplace else, because the State Project selects certain states to work in
right.
each cycle. Maybe you could talk about that, Melissa, because
Well,
we
wait,
don't
well,
need
but we
to get
could,
a
but we could do
trifecta
both. We could do
and
both, Nina.
veto power. Yes, we can.
Yeah, I mean, we could go to the policy library. That's what she's saying. We could look at some of those
Yeah.
model bills and say, hey, why isn't Maryland doing this? But yeah, you're right.
I'm just
You're
thinking
right.
that some of our newer people
Yeah.
may not understand that we were raising money for Pennsylvania
Right.
because we already have what we are working towards for
Right.
them.
Well, that is exactly where I'm going next. So Stephanie and Gary want to know, how do we get involved in the States Project?
So,
So go for it.
Indivisible Montgomery has a giving circle with the States Project. And it would be amazing if folks were interested in joining that giving circle. I'll put the link in the chat. There is what's happening now. And by the way, I just want to say this. Last year, Indivisible Montgomery raised over $31,000 for this work, which is incredible and a hugely impactful amount. And that is by bringing together a bunch of people. In fact, there were 93 donors, which is incredible. I mean, anyone who can organize more than 10 people who will say yes to state legislatures is powerful in my book. So that's wonderful. And this year, the state's project is focused on a couple of things. In 2025, there are elections in Virginia. It's a state where we've worked cycle after cycle, and we currently have the state Senate is not up for election this year, and they have a 1-seat majority there. We are working to protect the House of Delegates majority, which that's what they call their state house, and it is also a 1-seat majority. So that we won by about 935 votes in 2023. So we want to make sure to protect that majority because there is an opportunity for a Democratic trifecta in Virginia if a Democrat can win the governor's mansion, which is also up this year. That would be a 16th trifecta, which would be an incredible thing. And we know that the last time Virginia had a trifecta, they were able to, end the death penalty in the state, expand environmental protections. And my favorite thing that they did was they took an old holiday that honored a Confederate soldier and turned it into a new holiday, Election Day.
Wow.
So those are the types of things that can happen when a trifecta is in place, as you all know. And that's really powerful. So we are hoping for that for Virginia this year. That will be our electoral focus this year, as well as starting our work for 2026 states. Early dollars that come in this year can make sure that they don't have to fire staff, that they can retain staff that just helped them in their last election cycle, that they can start the recruitment process early. Because as I mentioned, in 40 out of the 50 states, being a state legislator is a part-time job that pays almost nothing. There is no glamour. Most of your constituents don't know who you are, and it's sometimes hard to recruit in these districts. So starting early and getting that going is a really important piece of the puzzle that our team is determined to help assist with this year.
Great. Final questions from anybody? We're at 8:20. Looking for any hands up or anybody else out there? Did we answer the questions for the folks in the chat? Was that put in a question?
This is
Nick?
Dale. I asked the Tom Homan question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I asked that question because, I mean, this thing, and it's been fabulous presentation. I'm so happy to have heard everything.
Good.
But the presentation was kind of presented as how to Trump-proof states. And so I was thinking that that was going to be more of a legal kind of conversation than a political conversation. And everything that's being discussed is so important, but that's what's going to happen next year, the year after, and so on. And I'm really concerned about the migrants that come into this country and some of those kind of immediate things. And obviously, we don't know the answer to the question. I personally think it's absurd for him to try to prosecute the mayor himself, because it's not just the mayor. In fact, I understand it's the entire state of Illinois. But, where does the law come down? And, what do us little peons, what can we do? But I'm worried about this, folks.
Of course. And Dale, it's a valid worry. And totally, I think some of it does go back to the fact that if you have a solid Democratic state, you have a good AG, you hopefully, I learned tonight, I didn't know this until Melissa said it, that's a state legislature can help set the powers and duties of the Attorney General of the state. That's very good news. Yeah, but I just don't know. I think a lot of what we're hearing is very performative. Like if you look at some of the EOs that are coming out now from the administration, they're impossible. Okay. I mean, maybe in some other, I don't know, maybe I'm being optimistic, but the thought of abolishing birthright citizenship is just insane. And, so I think what we're hearing, hopefully some of what we're hearing is a lot of bluster and stuff that's just not going to happen. But on the other hand, we have to do absolutely everything in our power to fight back. Today, sadly, one of our Maryland congressional representatives voted for the Lake and Riley bill, and we are sick about that. I mean, we all, April Delaney up in District 6. We all worked for her and canvassed for her, and I mean, knocked on doors for her, and here she is siding with the Republicans. So we have to speak out, and we have to push back as hard as we can.
Yeah, we helped
That's what
Kirsten
we will do.
Sinema get elected too, remember?
Amy, thank you, sure. Thanks for yes, and this is a good question, Patel. The last question coming in, and it's the one I forgot to ask. Thank you. What differentiates the state's project from the DLCC? And folks, if you don't know what the DLCC is, no worries. It's the arm of the Democratic Party that is supposed to fund state races. Good question. What do you think,
Yeah.
Melissa?
So one difference is that they are the party, and so they may have different priorities in states, and they also are often in different states than we are. Although when we are in the same state, we talk with them very much about strategy and align. They often bring dollars. Our goal is to bring dollars and data and partnership in terms of working really hand in glove with the state caucus, which is the entity in the state that's focused on the legislature, to make sure that the entire program runs evidence-based, research-backed tactics for each state legislative district, especially those tipping point districts. And so we have become a very, very close partner in states in a way that the DLCC just isn't quite set up to do. And we are also focused on electing majorities that will improve people's lives. And we have done some bipartisan work. So Alaska is an example of a place where we supported a bipartisan coalition that stands against a right-wing Republican governor who wants to deforest the state and defund education. And that's an important piece of our work too. And the DLCC, of course, is a party org, so does not do that type of work. And the other thing that differentiates us is the policy work that we do. We're trying to equip state lawmakers with the tools and resources they need to advance policies that improve the lives of the people that they serve, and that piece goes beyond elections. So those are some of the differences. We are often the top funder when we go into a state. I believe that the DLCC should be the top funder in a lot of ways. So I'm both proud of that and like a little bit like, come on, you guys do more.
Right.
But yes, we do talk with them and coordinate and align on which districts we're focused on and all those things.
Melissa, doesn't the DLCC tend to give a little money to everybody, whereas we funnel more money to the tipping point winnable races?
Yes, we fund the caucus and align on those tipping point seats, and then have things like the door knocking challenge and run more, help run more programs in the state. So yes, that is a difference as well.
All right. Well, thank you
The
so much,
policy
Melissa.
library.
Well,
Maria
you know
wants
what?
to know. It's in the chat.
Yeah,
Maria.
we can send, oh yeah, there's a link in the chat, right? To
There
the
is.
to the policy library,
I'll
Maria.
copy it. I got it. I'll put it back in again.
Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, it's a fascinating. It's cool to look through that. I've spent time digging into that. It's awesome stuff. Okay, well, this is great. We did pick up one last question I'm not sure we can answer. So what can state legislatures do to counter the Lake and Riley Act, which is, of course, horrible?
Which hasn't passed the Senate yet.
Yes, it has. Sorry,
Oh, it
kiddo.
has.
Yeah,
Oh,
yep.
yeah.
Passed last week.
Yeah.
It's on its way to Trump now. Thanks in part to our wonderful representative up in District 6.
In my district.
Yeah, in your
Yes.
district. What did you do wrong, Nina? Come on. No, I'm sorry. Thoughts on that one? Well, that's going to be our last question.
That is going to be my take-home homework for y'all. So I'm
Okay.
going to go ask the policy team about
Yeah.
it, and I will share back and please distribute what I learn. Because I want,
Thank you. That's perfect. If you
Yeah.
would do that, I'd be happy to do that. And one of the things about Lake and Riley that is so ridiculous is that it disrupts the relationship between local law enforcement and the feds in a way that is not intended to do. What is, it's first, and also it's not funded. I've seen estimates of like what, I don't know, I put it in the email tonight, how many billions of dollars it's going to cost the taxpayers to enforce the Lake and Riley Act, if they actually even really enforce it. And Congress did not authorize any new money for ICE. So what the hell? All right, enough. Melissa, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who was here tonight. Really appreciate your time. And Melissa, we'll be in touch.
thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate y'all and the work that you do.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.